Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to our Bread for the Journey series. Thank you for joining us during this Eastertide series as we discuss ethics and community engagement. It was a pleasure to have Dr. Timothy Sedgwick with us last week to give us kind of a foundation on an Anglican view of ethics. And this week it is a great pleasure to have Dr. Sayilgan, who is the visiting professor for Islamic theology and religious pluralism at Virginia Theological Seminary. Her husband was originally going to be with us, but he is traveling. He is a PhD student at Catholic University, and I've met him there as well. So she's going to come and speak to us about a Muslim view of interfaith relations. So thank you very much.
I'm not checking text messages. I'm just too talkative, so I'll just have to keep an eye out on the timer. So first, thank you, Reverend Sean, for inviting me. Thank you to all of you for allowing me to speak in your most sacred space. I've never been to Church, no, it's St. Paul's Church, but I've heard a lot about its reputation and its wonderful worship service. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to spend time with you tonight. I don't want to take too much time talking because I'm really interested also what you have to say. I think you got a little bit of bio information. I mean, you have a little bit of information from me. Am I speaking loud enough? Can you hear me in the back? Okay, good. So yeah, what I would like to talk about is simply a Muslim perspective on why I think, what are the realities of interfaith dialogue and what are the obstacles and what is my vision for a Christian-Muslim, especially Christian-Muslim relation, because that's what I'm interested in. It was always part of my own reality, part of my own life. I grew up I was born, raised in Germany. So I was very early on faced with questions which, dealt with, had an interfaith perspective. I mean, people had lots of questions about Islam and they had a lot of misunderstandings about Islam, but also in my own Muslim community I saw that there are, certain misinformations about the other, about the Christian other. So what's the reality about for Muslims these days? I mean, we are always in the news, that's for sure. But especially Islam is perceived as a backward, oppressive, radical, fanatical, violent, misogynist religion. I mean, let's just put it out there. That's how Islam and Muslims are perceived. If you look at recent surveys, usually done by the Pew Research Center, you see that Americans, and not just Americans, but also Western Europeans, have a very unfavorable view of Islam, to put it in nice ways. So, and there were also, high numbers who were in favor of the so-called Muslim ban, because there's just the reality of having fear of Islam. And people are fearful of Muslims, they don't know about Islam, and all what they see, we can't blame them, all what they see is violence and terrorism and extremism in the news, right? Now this is undeniable. I'm not here to make an apology or say this is not the true picture of Islam. There are people who self-identify as Muslims and who are trying to tarnish the image of Islam, and this is a reality we have to deal with within the Muslim community. But also there's the reality that the majority of Muslims have throughout history had amicable, friendly relationship with non-Muslims, their non-Muslim neighbors. How come that these majorities of Muslim communities who went into India and Indonesia, you are more educated than I am, but all these different parts of the world who were so drawn to the Quran, to their holy scripture, that they didn't feel that there's any tension to live with Buddhists, with Hindus, with Zoroastrians, with Yazidis. So we see that for centuries, or who even welcomed, for example, the Jews who were the expulsion of the Jews, when that happened, we all know that who welcomed them? The Ottoman Empire. And they were pretty happy because they received all the brains, the intellectual people, the Jewish community from Spain. So we need to ask, what is the modern, why is this happening now, and why is this not happening? Why hasn't it happened before, right? So centuries of mostly harmonious relationships, and this is not because Muslims lived detached from their scripture, detached from the Quran, but they were informed by the Quranic vision of interfaith dialogue, right? The Quranic vision talks about the Christians and Jews and says that these are the people of the book. These are the Ahl al-Kitab. They have received revelations from God, right? And so this is why they have a very important status within Islamic law. The Quran calls Muslims to safe, secure places of worship. It very specifically, explicitly says, you can Google it, I don't have the verse number, but in the Quran it's stated that Muslims are obliged to protect churches and synagogues, that even in a situation of warfare, that they cannot murder priests or monks. So this is all laid out in the books of Islamic law. It's very fundamental. This is where Muslims have always erred on the side of caution when they went into different areas where they encountered communities of different faith, like Buddhism or like Hinduism, that they said this verse in the Quran, or these verses in the Quran which talk about the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, can be expanded to other faith communities as well, right? So this is why we have, for example, a very rich theological engagement in Spain. We have very rich theological encounters between European Christian theologians. I mean, just remember St. Thomas Aquinas, having no hesitation to read the works, translated works of Aristotle and all of that. So just like now, since graduation comes up, there has been such a rich tradition of seeking knowledge in Islam. Basically, knowledge was always seen as part of the quest to come closer to God. To seek sacred knowledge was an act of worship. So in early Islam, for example, you don't have formal institutions, schools or universities. What has happened is people went out on travel, which was called the rihla. If they heard there was a famous scholar somewhere, a pious person who then reached the degree of being a scholar, they would travel for months just to learn about the interpretation of a verse, just to learn about a prophetic tradition. They would make that very exhausting journey to meet this person, just not to receive a degree or a certificate or a grade, but simply to have the chance to come closer to God, because this person might have something to tell, to share, that brings the person, the Muslim, closer to God. So this was the quest for sacred knowledge. That's why we have people like Avicenna, or you have, for example, you talk about algorithms today, right? Algorithms, that's an Arabic word, it's an Islamic word. It's the person who actually was dealing with algorithms was Al-Khwarizmi, right? So we had a beautiful exhibition in DC, 1001 Inventions, which talked about how Islam in its golden age contributed to civilization, human civilization. Now it's always perceived that Muslims have a trouble with science and progress and technology and advancement, that Islam is irreconcilable with democracy and all of that. That's simply untrue. It's factually untrue. Because you see that Muslims were very much at the forefront, and I have to say were, but that doesn't mean that they are not contributing in great ways to the society and to the global world at large. You have Muslims who are doctors, you have Muslims who are lawyers, you have Muslims who are not only cab drivers, they are restaurant owners, they are community activists, they are teachers, professors, you name them. The problem with the media is that we don't see the image of these people. We don't see the reality of the overwhelming majority of Muslims who are inspired by the Quran to work for social justice, to work for the common good, So sadly, what we only see in the media is one side of the coin. And again, that's not to say that that we are not having problems with extremism right now. But please also give credit to the overwhelming majority of Muslims who are actually inspired by the Quran to do wonderful, important work. And again, this is not because Muslims are living detached from the Quran, but the Quran always calls the believer to investigate, to reflect, to contemplate about the universe, to ask important questions, to seek always greater knowledge about God. So this is why, for example, the verses in the Quran say that the creation in the universe, each of them are a sign of God, a letter. So a sign, what does a sign mean? It has a significance, it points to someone or something, right? So every sign needs to be studied, needs to be understood, and ultimately it should bring you closer to God, right? It discloses something important about God. That's why the Quran talks about the book of the universe, and that's why we had always theologians at the same time being great scientists. We didn't see that there was that these two aspects of human reality were somehow irreconcilable. In fact, they were together because everything, if you study medicine, it reveals an aspect about God which is very particular. The healer, for example. If you study engineering, it reveals an aspect, again, a sacred knowledge which is very particular about God. If you study nutrition, it is God the provider, the sustainer, where you study his one specific attribute and quality about God. So each of us, because of our unique nature and connection with God, has a very interesting, attachment to one particular aspect of God. Each of us feels drawn to a certain quality of God, whether we are going into law to study God's justice. Again, one manifestation of God's name is, establishing harmony and a certain scale and system in the universe. So the vision for Muslims were always to, whatever they were studying, sacred knowledge meant, if you go into physics, if you go into medicine, if you go into nutrition, if you go into pedagogy, everything is ultimately a manifestation of God's beautiful names. So whatever we study, whatever we pursue in education is basically nothing but a disclosure about God. You're just drawn, and because of your unique human nature, everyone is attached to a particular aspect of God. And that's why everyone is so important in the eyes of God, because each of us is a unique configuration of these divine names. What Muslims understand as a so-called imago Dei. So basically, a human being is a unique configuration of these divine names. That doesn't mean that he fully displays these names, but he is a limited reflection. I say limited because we can be kind and compassionate and loving and just, but always to a limited degree. It's never absolute like God. So we strive towards that, but we always realize that this is something we always need to, make progress on this way. So why am I saying this? Again, the reality is Islam and Muslims are perceived this way. What we know from history and factually is true, and we also see now, but people are not aware of this reality, is that Muslims constantly are, because of their reading of the Quran, constructive reading of the Quran, are doing great things in terms of knowledge, in terms of their contributions to society. I think there are two things, because I only want to talk for 20 minutes and then receive your questions and feedback. There are two things which I always which I prioritize in my own life, is to be relational, to have a relational life, to not always talk about the Muslim other overseas. But when I found myself being in an adult forum in Falls Church, people asked me about a Muslim community overseas, and I said, have you actually met the Muslim neighbors here in Falls Church, which is the most ethnically diverse, religiously diverse area? And there was silence. And I think this is one of our huge challenges today. We live in very diverse societies, and in Europe you see that also coming. Societies are in flux, in transformation. Immigrants are coming in, and there's this notion, oh, who am I? And I don't know these people. I mean, then make an effort to get to know these people, who live in your own community, in your own neighborhood, rather than saying this is what media presents to me in terms of Muslims over there. But who are the Muslims here? And to have really prioritize the relational life. And we all know in our traditions that we are responding to God. I mean, we are in relation with God, but also wants us to be in relation with each other. And in Norway, there was an interesting study. Muslims started a project called A Cup of Tea, because there was a high degree of Islamophobia in the country. And all what they did is just inviting their non-Muslim neighbors for a cup of tea, and over a period of months, the numbers of fear, basically the negative stereotypes actually decreased. So that's really powerful. If you meet someone over a meal, or just, random acts of kindness really make such a powerful impact on people. I remember I was in a restaurant and I was praising the olive oil and how tasty it was, and then just a stranger approached me and said, "This is a bottle of olive oil for you. I just bought it for you." And then she left, but it was so beautiful. I think she just wanted me to understand that she is in support of Muslims, and she is loving and caring, and that she is not like, the usual stereotype we think people think of Muslims. So it was a random act of kindness, but I still carry it so strong with me, because I think really these are the things where we can make a difference. And then the second thing, first thing, relational life in our own small micro circles, but then also I would say critical media consumption. I know I'm preaching to the choir probably, but this is something people don't understand. Oftentimes, just with our food intake, we are very considerate and careful, but when it comes to our minds and souls, we just take it in and we don't realize. Even in my Muslim community, we become a filter for negative news, as if all what we know is negativity in the world. Whereas I always tell my Muslim friends, the reality is that people are good, people are kind. The people I meet in my life daily, they are good people. They smile at me, they ask me how am I doing, they reach out. So that's the reality, and I think overall, as I said, the majority of people around the world are good people, and we need to really be very careful when we use our social media outlets and our, generally consume media, that we don't become a filter for negative news, because then it really brings people to despair. You have this image of the world as being such a meaningless place and violent, and it alienates you. Even just the weather forecast sometimes, if you're like, Frankenstorm, right? It's coming, and you feel like, oh my God, everything is out of control. I'm a little tiny being who is alienated from nature and estranged, and everything is just hostile to me. This is very wrong, because it really creates this distant relationship where you find yourself as being detached or an entity to yourself, which is not true, because you are an interdependent being. So these are the two things which come to my mind as I think ahead, for Christian-Muslim engagement. And the things which I prioritize in my own life, definitely. So, as a Muslim woman, of course, when people see me, they see me with a scarf, and there's all these images coming. What do you think of me when you see me? Terrorism, extremism. You probably don't think I'm a liberated, confident woman with 3 MAs, 1 PhD, 5 fluent languages. There's always this image, oh, this person is oppressed, and maybe also brainwashed, because even if you tell people that this was a free choice to cover this way, to dress a certain way, to follow Islam, being raised in the midst of Western society, saying, I choose this life, and this is where I see meaning and find meaning. is for people absolutely incomprehensible. So sometimes to step back and not making assumptions is very important, I guess, because yes, there's again no denying that Muslim women and all women face struggles every day around the world. But there are also so many women who, on a daily basis, are inspired by the Quran to liberate themselves. They are empowered by the Quran. And they actually, when Islam emerged on the scene, it basically liberated women from this state where they were basically degraded. I mean, Islam in the pre-Islamic society, Muslim women and female girls were, buried alive because it was seen as a shame and honor to have a daughter, or sometimes even, parents couldn't provide for their children, and so they would fear that, not knowing that actually God is the sole provider, they would kill their children because they didn't wanted them to suffer. So these are the things I experience as a Muslim woman. I have a little daughter, so sometimes I ask myself, will she also, go through the same things like I did? Because, and this is why I stand here, I think I can only do that much. I can go out and tell my story and say there are many, many Muslim women and Muslim girls who actually, because of sound, healthy Islamic education, are able to insist on their rights and find their place in this world. So this is just a basic introduction. I thank you for your attention, and I would welcome your questions and comments. Thank you.
This is somewhat related to what you were just saying. I was wondering, when you said you lived in Germany before, have you always worn the headscarf, and have you always felt that that was something important, or is that something that, in reaction to how Islam is perceived today, and whether what is your sense of, do you feel more persecuted, or do you feel there's more animosity now than when you were growing up?
Yeah, so I started wearing the head cover and also dressing in an Islamic way when I started 5th grade. So it was really something. I grew up in a traditional devotional family, but my parents were not educated, so they couldn't deal with larger secular societies, issues of critical examining religion and faith, and what we call the hermeneutics of suspicion. You're always suspicious about the religious sources and who, the patriarchal readings and who interprets these texts, and are these maybe man-made statements. That was German society for me, because I grew up I was educated in the German system, which I feel very privileged about, because there was a strong tradition of critical, reflective, investigative learning. But I started to embrace Islam because as a reaction to how people perceived Islam. There might be women who take it as a symbol to counter this kind of narrative, but I personally, for me, it's an expression of my devotion to God, just like I would say a nun, for example, a Christian nun would take a certain religious garb, and it's an expression of her piety and close identification. So yeah, absolutely. I think once you put on the scarf, especially in some countries of Europe, you are very visible in the public sphere. You can be identified as a Muslim. And covering your head, as I said, is perceived as oppression and as going against, feminist interests. So I, in fact, experienced a lot of discrimination. People, making weird faces on the street, calling me names. And as a child, I was not very confident at that time. So I didn't know much about Islam to really, answer these types of challenges. But as I grew up, I realized, I have to make a decision. Either I follow Islam because I'm really intellectually, spiritually connected to it. So I started to really study and investigate the sources. Because as I said, my mother, she didn't study, she's illiterate, she never went to school. My parents are from a little Kurdish tiny village. They never had the chance to receive an education. But I was the first one in my family who went to school out of 6 children. So when I started to apply for jobs, for internships, I always received this same response. When people saw my picture, because we have to put the picture on our applications, they saw my scarf and they said, no, you can't work here because the way you are dressed, your Muslim identity is simply, not welcome here. I mean, and I've had people like openly, directly telling me that, supervisors, people who worked in different, who were actually in charge of human resources. They would tell me, this is not the image we want to present, or this is something which we don't want our company to support. So I think, and this is very sad, because on the one side we say we are all for freedom of expression and freedom of, freedom of self-expression, and we welcome diversity, but in a subtle way, or behind the doors, it doesn't look that way. Youth are very disillusioned in many countries right now, and I don't want to say that everyone who is an angry youth becomes a radical, but I can say there's a probability when you are a disenfranchised young person, you're trying to make your way into the workforce, into society, you want to make your contribution, you say, I'm a Muslim, but I'm also a German citizen. I can be both. People tell you, no, you can't be. And sadly, this is still the case. When we look at studies, I always knew that my teachers were discriminating me. But now there are official studies who say that teachers know where kids come from immigrant background, they send them into the bad schools. So that and once you are in a school which doesn't really prioritize deep learning, then you also fall behind. So these are the problems, I think. So we are, in a way, as a society, I think, and this is not a problem here, but in other societies as well, hypocritical. We say, you are welcome the way you are, but then at the same time we say, no, as long as, if you are like us, then you are welcome. And I think this is something where many Muslims feel that they are being excluded, and that they are not given the chance that they can say, we can make our a contribution to human civilization, which they did actually, right? I mean, we saw that in history, and they still do it, but they face a lot of obstacles. And I think we can't deny our responsibility as people who we have to call out these kind of practices. We have to name them, we have to point and say this is wrong. Because imagine if this is your child, if this is your child, what would you do? You want your child to have all the possibilities and opportunities which is in the world to thrive in intellectual ways, spiritual ways. And I want that for every Hindu, for every atheist person, for every person, so that they have the same opportunities without facing any discrimination. And it's sad because I hear from people in my home country, many youth who are now trying to leave Germany because they are just psychologically damaged. They don't want to deal with it anymore. And my own sister, actually, who was born and raised in Germany, she is now moving to Turkey because she says that she just can't deal with the atmosphere, the climate in the country, and always the unfriendliness and people like making remarks. Some people, you need to be very strong to face with this.
Is that one of the reasons that you came to this country, and how have you felt in this country up until now?
Well, I always say that I feel very, I haven't seen all of the United States, but for the most part in the East Coast, I always felt very welcomed, and I never had negative experiences. In fact, I also, when my family visited, they said this is such a more welcoming place. People are friendlier on a daily basis. And I think that's really helpful because it makes living together much easier. And although I love Germany and there's a lot of great stuff happening and wonderful people, there are these things which we have to deal with. But I'm hopeful that we can face them as a society. But they are there, and we need to improve those things.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. We hear so much in the news about Sharia law, which would be willing to say, help us understand.
Sure. In 2 minutes, I give you a crash course in Sharia. It's like giving constitutional law in 2 minutes. But if you just go away with the knowledge that Sharia is an evolving corpus of Islamic regulations, it's not a fixed, static system, then you already know more than 90% of non-Muslims around the world, I think. But Sharia literally means path to water. It actually means path, but the way how Muslims have understood it, there are two main sources of the Sharia, which is generally translated as Islamic law. But law has always this sense of, you do things, you have to do things, and it's actually Muslims were always interested in, and just like Christians, what is the most God-pleasing way to do this? So if there's an issue like healthcare, for example, what would be God's answer to this? What would be the most God-pleasing way to handle issues like healthcare? So then Muslims look into the Quran, which they consider the word of God. Again, just being the word of God doesn't mean that it's just 600 pages of literal verses and there's no interpretive activity. In fact, Muslims continue to interpret the sacred text since centuries. That's why we have millions of commentaries. So you have that source, Quran, and then you have Prophet Muhammad's life example, which is called the Sunnah. And then you look into these two sources and you try to find, as a jurist, as a Muslim jurist, you try to see what can the Quran say about healthcare, or the Sunnah, the prophetic lifestyle. And if of course the Quran doesn't say anything like literally specifically about healthcare, you try to, with your reason, to come up with a reasoning that would be based on some sacred principles in these two sources. And your ruling about healthcare could be guiding for society, but there are other jurists who would contradict you because they come up with other arguments, again, based on the Quran and the Sunnah, same sources, and that's what happens. So we have scholars, jurists, who, for example, on the issue of organ transplantation, come with two different perspectives. One says yes because of this and this. Another jurist says no because of this and this. And it's up to the individual believer to decide what they want to follow. In fact, when the British came into India, the first thing they were so frustrated about was that Islamic law was too flexible. They wanted everything to be like strict in one corpus and one rule for everyone. But Islamic law is so flexible, and it was never interested in establishing a common rule for everyone. It always really honored the reality that every individual context is different. So we have this corpus of Islamic law, Sharia law, which is constantly evolving, constantly new principles. Yeah, there's some few red lights there. For example, there's absolute agreement about that 5 times prayer is canonical and you have to do it. You should do it ideally. No one can force you. There's no authority. But this is where no disagreement is. 5 times ritual prayer. But on other issues, for example, inheritance law, business transactions, divorce, there are so many interesting legal rulings, and there's a very good professor at Columbia University. He's an expert. He's actually a Christian scholar, Islamic studies scholar. Wa'il Halak. So his book is called Sharia Practice Theory, and you'll be amazed if you just look into these sources and see he provides like thousands of documents and data how really Islamic law was implemented in many countries. This is why, for example, in the Ottoman Empire you had courts, Jewish courts, which dealt only with Jewish religious issues. You had Christian courts. There were multiple legal systems at play, all under the umbrella of the Sharia. How did that work? I mean, if you think of this today, you would be like, what? A separate court for Muslims, a separate court for Jews, a separate court for Hindus? That would be like, But this flexibility was a reality in the empire, which, spanned like huge countries. So this is very important that revelation is there for Muslims, but reason is always invited to be at play with revelation. It's never perceived as this is what the Quran says, and there's nothing to be said about this. There's always exegetical activity. That's why we have, for example, scientific interpretations. Just for you to keep in mind, there's no Sharia court. And actually, Muslims are practicing Sharia every day. For example, to be kind to your parents is a Sharia law. To smile at your neighbor is a Sharia law. To pray 5 times a day is a Sharia law. To fast in the month of Ramadan, which is upon us, May 27th, is a Sharia law. Muslims are doing that. How can you outlaw Sharia? It's impossible, you know. So when I hear states trying to outlaw Sharia law, I think what people have most in mind is stoning of women or cutting off hands. I mean, if you look at really historical facts, this was very, very rare in Islamic society because a jurist was always called to be compassionate rather than implement punishment. And jurists also were interested in bringing people back into their organic small communities rather than putting them in, you know, closing them up in prisons, because prison systems didn't exist. They wanted people to come back and negotiate and make an agreement or confession, and that was it. And that's what the Quran actually tells people, you know, there is punishment, but it's always better when you forgive. So the ideal is always set out, even though the human reality of, you know, punishment or revenge is also accepted. Does that, I mean, it's a very quick answer. Yes, on this side. Yeah.
This is wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
And it makes me think that there is so rare an opportunity for people to learn. I was always taught that Jews, Christians, and Muslims worship the same God.
That's what I say, even though conceptions are different of that same God.
You call it Allah,
Mhm.
and Muhammad is his prophet.
Right.
Different way, same God. After 9/11, I kept waiting for the real Islamic words to come from some leader to balance the horrific stuff that was happening from renegades. But in the absence of positive, wonderful things like you're teaching us, people go to fear and go to push and separate.
Yeah, fear is a very powerful emotion.
Very powerful.
Can mobilize millions.
But that's human.
Yeah.
And my search has been, since 9/11, is for some groups or leaders or coalitions or Muslim communities getting together to teach what it really is instead of what is out there.
Right.
Is there any kind of body? I know the Catholic Church has the Pope. I don't know about all other organizations, but is there any voice of Islam out there other than this cleric, that cleric, and many of them are not good spokespersons?
I can tell you, you know, if you just Google how many Muslim scholars or organizations have condemned and still condemning.
Why do
these
they
terrorists.
not get any media attention?
Why? I mean, because good news doesn't
I
sell.
understand the media is very, very
I mean, look at
biased,
this. I think this is
but there's
this is
far
more
too
powerful.
little of what you're doing.
Good actions are more meaningful in the sight of God. But if you look, because you have to overcome yourself, you have to follow certain rules, you have to work every day and actively. To do good is harder in many ways. To do evil is very easy. You know, I mean, this house, this church was built, I don't know when, and for how long, but you can destroy it within seconds. So the evil stuff, and sadly we are also drawn to it in a way because it's so sensationalist. But for me, it's very, very powerful if someone before sunrise gets up to pray. It's really meaningful, you know, someone at 5:30 a.m. standing up, getting up, interrupting his prayer, or coming to a service for night vigil These are powerful actions, human actions, but we don't value them as much. They don't get the coverage, or like here, a Muslim coming to speak to a Christian audience, or Muslims and Christians doing lots of interfaith work throughout the country. Millions of work is done. If you just go at Harvard's, there's this nice website, pluralism.org by Diana Eck. You see there are millions of interfaith activities every day.
So
But they don't get the coverage.
Are you saying that perhaps the Muslim way of doing their faith is far more personal, and there isn't the overarching kind of community teaching arm to the faith?
It is personal,
out
but
there?
it is also not personal. It's very communal, but it's also very individual. For example, you can be a perfect Muslim without ever going to mosque. Because a mosque is not a church. It's not where you receive the sacraments. A mosque is simply a place to gather, because Muslims believe the whole world is a place of prostration, and all beings are servants of God. So you can even pray in the park 5 times a day, but you are still the best Muslim you can ever be. At the same time, in many ways, Islam never had like a central authority like the Pope, which is at times an advantage and at times a disadvantage, because then you have, you had this transnational body of scholars which are respected, but they don't have like a sacred authority about the community. They provide opinions and guidance, but you are not bound to follow any one of them. It's always between you and God. There's no one in between. Even Prophet Muhammad is not an intercessor in that sense. He is not a mediator between you and God. He's just the deliverer of the message. I heard someone in a forum say, oh, in some ways Islam is postmodern, because there's this push now where people, they don't want to have institutionalized religion, which seems to be the trend these days. But Muslims, they worship in a personal way. Like I said, Sharia law, it's in my heart how I implement Sharia law. For example, I have to pay the alms tax every year. It's 1.25% of my wealth. But there's no one who comes and forces me to pay. I do it because of my relationship with Islam, because I know if I don't pay, I have to pay there. It is really something which goes organically, and it's your own relationship with God. But at the same time, Islam also ensured that there is a uniformity. For example, the rituals are the same. If you go to Indonesia, the greeting is the same, the prayers are the same, the setup in the mosque is the same, the fasting is the same, the dress for the most part is the same. Like, okay, there might be varieties in terms of color and shape, but mostly, Muslim women and men are covered when they go into public. So these things are very communal, and Muslim societies tend to be very community-oriented, because also the Quran says that you have to take care of your parents, of your elderly, and all of these things are become a very communal obligation. So organizing funerals, for example. So there is, in a sense, it's both ends. It's individual and communal. Right? Talking about Islamic organizations, as for example, in North America, the largest umbrella organizations is the Islamic Society of North America, which has a bureau, an interfaith office here in DC. So if you check it, it's isna.net. And they do a lot of interfaith collaboration. They had this campaign, Shoulder to Shoulder, where they collaborated with Jewish and Christian communities. Just look at their website, interfaith activities. The issue is that a mosque is not obliged to be connected to them. They are not, forced to be connected to ISNA or to Islamic Society of North America. They can operate on their own. Now, there's an important fact that people are not radicalized in mosques. The people who are actually radicalized are those who don't go into the mosque. Right. We always think that they're preaching hate in the mosque, what's going on in the hate. Actually, there's a Gallup report. It shows when you go into the mosque, people get to know you. There's a way of changing your ideas and being corrected, challenged. Then you don't go into radicalism. But the people who fall into radicalism are through the internet.
That makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
because
that's too individual, because
That-
no one checks your
they're
ideas,
isolated, and
and you're
they're
just
doing-
isolating. And that's why I say no isolation. We have to go out.
Does that North America Association Society
Mm-hmm.
ever have an external message to those that don't know, a way of countering the radicalized, lonely individuals that don't seem to have any goal except destruction?
Oh, yes,
a way of
absolutely.
separating publicly Islam from what these
They've
people are
done
doing.
so many times and they still do
Right.
it, but again, as I said, they don't get that coverage. There was a huge, I think, prayer of peace and Muslim Friday prayer right in front of the Capitol. Millions of Muslims, thousands of Muslims came to basically say we are against extremism and radicalism. But again, those things rarely get the coverage. If someone comes, a person and his name is Muhammad and Ahmed and who commits a terrorist attack, then it's all over the news, right? If it's a white person who has nothing to do with Islam, then we say, yeah, he was psychologically unstable, a lunatic, whatever. We isolate it. But with Islam is you are guilty by association.
Out of ignorance.
Yeah. When the San Bernardino attack happened, my daughter was 6 months at that time. That was the first time I felt really unsafe to go out because I thought people see me now and they think, oh, she has a baby like this Muslim lady who in San Bernardino who didn't even care about her daughter and went into killing innocent, people there. So I thought people see me and then associate me with this person, and so that was really a moment where I had to think, oh my God, can I really leave the house? Because I get the looks, people, they have, the questions coming, and media is really powerful in creating this certain image about you, which you are not. Just you're trying to constantly distance yourself, but it's hard, it's very hard.
So since we did get a little bit of a late start, is there one more question? Did anybody have one more question? Anne?
Susanna, this is great, and I've been looking forward to you coming to be with us for a long time. If a Christian church would like to find a way to build a relationship with a Muslim group, whether a mosque or a Muslim student association, do you have some practical thoughts for us on ways to approach that and what kinds of activities could be undertaken in common?
Right. That's an excellent question. And I think this is really where the question, so what next? Okay, now we know all that stuff and we've known before, but what next to do? I would recommend always first connecting with ISNA, the Islamic Society of North America, which has basically all mosques who are working with them. That means they identify with their work, and which is very progressive and open, to identify the mosques in your area or the people whom you can talk to, and then basically try to reach out to that person through email, contact, or whatever. Have like a small intimate gathering first. You have to identify 2-3 sincere people who want to do the same thing like you, who have the same vision, and then really do something on a regular, sustained basis, rather than, okay, once a year we do a little, which is good. Even if you do it every year once, that I would be really grateful for that. Because the problem with our interfaith dialogue is that it happens once and then no more. So really the challenge is to have sustained dialogue where you can really grow together, get to know each other. I mean, I'm coming now, I give you an impulse and I leave, but I wish there would be a continuous dialogue where we could come together, explore more questions together. So really something maybe on a monthly basis, or even if you do it on an annual basis, but that would be great. But do it in a way which really says this is important. If you believe that your faith is universal, which I think the Christian tradition is, you have a responsibility to reach out and not to say, well, I don't care, okay, we've heard something about Islam, that's it. There's a real fear in this country, around the world, and this climate will somehow transform into some kind of disease, yeah? Whether it's, you call it radicalism or extremism or xenophobia, Islamophobia, whatever it is. But I always say, I have the responsibility to reach out, to go and meet my neighbors. I even make extra walks in my neighborhood just so people come out and talk to me, and so I can get to know them. So I think this is really a priority. Oftentimes dialogue forums are very formal. Try to invite people into your home, share a meal. It's always very different if you have someone in your private home rather than in a formal, I mean, as much as I value, it's important, but once you really open up your space, your personal space, that's where really trust grows. I'm not saying immediately, but I think informal dialogue is also important. I always think, okay, God put me in this world, I have the relationship with myself, body, heart, and soul, intellect. I have to have a balanced relationship with these kind of elements in my life. And then I have my family circle. There also needs to be healthy, balanced dialogue and relationship. Then I have my Muslim community. Then I have a Turkish Muslim community. Then I have my Muslim American community. But if I don't have a relationship with the larger non-Muslim society, then there's a problem. And I think that's where then the imbalance is reflected out in different ways. Diseases, spiritual diseases, I would say. People not knowing each other, people not knowing what they do in the night in front of their computers. These are all problems. To counter that, challenge it, I think, first, get to know the contacts. Second, sustain dialogue. And there are studies which we've done at the seminary where I work, which says if you do dialogue in your church or in your mosque, your community will flourish. Because in the process of getting to know the other, you actually get to know yourself. Because then you actually have to first, when a Muslim asks, so, explain me the Trinity. I still don't know. I'm like, Reverend Sean, help me out. So you actually have to step deeper into your faith tradition, which then makes you, and that's actually what I can testify in my own experience. I had to really, once I was faced with questions of theological nature and Islam, why are you wearing the scarf, why are you praying, why are you fasting, what is Islam? Then I really came to the realization I don't want to have a faith based on imitation, but really based on conviction and knowledge. And this is what really transforms you and has transformed faith communities. Really, dialogue is not, sometimes we think we don't have time, we don't even know our own tradition. We have to learn first, become experts, and then engage with the other. I think that's, it's not mutually exclusive. You can grow while you are in the process of dialoguing.
I would simply add to that too, Reverend Carol Flatt, who is the, do you know Carol?
Yeah, she was at the National Cathedral, right?
Yes, she was, and is the interreligious and ecumenical officer for our diocese. Has a lot of experience with this. She's had a women's group for a long
Daughters
time.
of Abraham, yeah.
Daughters of Abraham, it's Jewish, Muslim, and Christian women that get together, and they've been meeting for a long time, and lots of other varied activities. So she's a good resource.
Yeah, it's a great idea. If you choose like different books from each faith tradition on a monthly basis, I mean, you learn so much, and each of us has a circle of at least 300 people we know, right? And it really creates these waves where people go out, I've met this Muslim, I've met this Christian, and because people, especially the Muslim community, has so many relatives also overseas, it transforms also the countries. Like, I see in my own life, when I go to my Kurdish little tiny village in the east of Turkey, they see me as someone who has lived in the West, but is still a Muslim. Who loves aspects of the Christian tradition, like who engages with the West and still is not changed or in a way which they cannot identify anymore. And that also changes them. It's called social, there's a term for this in migration studies, but it just transforms communities when you go, because your Muslim neighbor has a network overseas and they are changed when they hear that. Not all Americans go and burn the Quran, like the pastor down in Florida, who has maybe 40 people in his church, and we're all family. But yeah, so things like this, I hope that helps.
Thank you again.